The autumn rain hammered against the palace windows as King Edmund lay in his bed, his breathing shallow and labored. The physicians had done all they could, but everyone in the kingdom of Aldoria knew the truth that hung heavy in the air. The king was dying. Prince Alexander stood outside his father's chamber, his jaw clenched tight. The guards flanking the doors kept their eyes forward, pretending not to notice the prince's internal struggle. Alexander had avoided this room for 3 months now, ever since the revelation that had shattered his world. "His Majesty is asking for you again, Your Highness." Lord Pemberton, the king's chief advisor, appeared at Alexander's elbow. The old man's voice was gentle but insistent. "He grows weaker by the hour." Alexander's green eyes, so like his mother's, hardened. "Let him ask." "Your Highness, please. Whatever has passed between you—" "Whatever has passed!" Alexander whirled on the advisor, his voice sharp enough to make the guards shift uncomfortably. "Do you know what he did, Pemberton? Do you have any idea?" The advisor's weathered face remained carefully neutral. "I know only that a son should not let his father die without peace." Alexander laughed bitterly. "Peace? He destroyed my peace the day he—" He stopped himself, running a hand through his dark hair. The secret was not his to share, not yet. Perhaps not ever. Inside the chamber, King Edmund's eyes fluttered open. His once powerful frame seemed to have shrunk into the massive bed. Queen Catherine sat beside him, holding his hand, her face etched with worry. "Has he come?" the king whispered. Catherine's silence was answer enough. Edmund closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his weathered cheek. I must tell him. He must understand." "Save your strength, my love," Catherine murmured, though her own voice trembled. She knew what burden her husband carried, what terrible choice he had made 25 years ago, and she knew why their son could not forgive. Outside, Alexander paced the corridor like a caged lion. Memories flooded back unbidden. His father teaching him to ride, to fence, to rule. The man who had seemed invincible, honorable, the epitome of what a king should be. Until 3 months ago, when Alexander had discovered the letters. Hidden in a secret compartment in the king's study, bundled in faded ribbon, were the documents that revealed the truth. His father had not won the crown through legitimate succession, as history claimed. There had been another heir, Edmund's own nephew, barely more than a child, who had mysteriously died just weeks before Edmund's coronation. The letters, written in Edmund's own hand to co-conspirators, outlined the plan in chilling detail. Not murder, perhaps, but manipulation and deceit that had led to the boy's exile and eventual death in poverty, far from home. Alexander's crown, his entire life, was built on a foundation of betrayal. "Your Highness," a soft voice interrupted his brooding. Princess Isabella, his younger sister, approached hesitantly. At 19, she had their mother's delicate features but their father's determined spirit. "Please, Alexander, go to him." "Not you too," Alexander muttered. Isabella touched his arm gently. "I know what you found. Mother told me." Alexander stared at her in shock. "You knew? And you can still—" "I can still love our father, yes," Isabella said firmly. "He is not only his worst deed, Alexander. He has been a good king, a good father." "Built on a lie," Alexander exploded. "Everything we are, everything we have, came from his treachery. How can you stand it?" "Because I have watched him suffer for it every day of my life," Isabella replied quietly. "You think he does not regret? You think the crown has not been his prison as much as his prize? Look closer, brother. See how he has spent 25 years trying to atone." Alexander turned away. She was right in a way. Edmund had been a just king, beloved by his people. He had reformed laws, built hospitals, fed the poor. But did good deeds erase the original sin? "He is dying, Alexander," Isabella whispered. "Whatever you decide about his legacy, do not let him die begging for your forgiveness. That is cruelty beyond even what you believe him capable of." Lord Pemberton approached again, his face grave. "Your Highness, I fear we have very little time." Alexander stood at the crossroads of his life. Down one path lay righteousness and the cold comfort of moral superiority. Down the other lay mercy, but at what cost to justice? Inside the chamber, Edmund's breathing grew more ragged. "Catherine," he gasped. Tell him about Marcus. Tell him why." "Shh," Catherine soothed, though tears streamed down her face. Marcus, Edmund's nephew, the boy who should have been king, the name they never spoke, the ghost that haunted every corner of their gilded life. Alexander's hand moved to the door handle, then pulled back. The weight of the crown he would soon wear pressed down on him already. Could he accept it, knowing its history? Could he rule with the shadow of his father's sin forever darkening his reign? "What would you have me do?" he whispered to no one. As if in answer, a servant burst into the corridor. "Your Highness, the king, he's calling for you most urgently. The physicians say—" The servant's voice broke. Alexander looked at Isabella, at Pemberton, at the doors that separated him from his dying father. Time was running out, and with it, any chance for either condemnation or absolution. He stepped forward, hand on the golden handle. Inside, he could hear his father's voice, weak but desperate. "Alexander, my son, forgive me." The prince pushed open the door. Edmund's eyes found him immediately, lighting up with desperate hope and crushing shame. The king's lips moved, forming words that came out as barely a whisper. "Forgive me." Alexander approached the bed slowly, each step feeling like a mile. His mother reached out to him, but he couldn't take her hand, couldn't accept any comfort. Not yet. "Forgive you?" Alexander's voice was steady, though his heart raced. "Do you even know what you're asking? Do you know what I know?" Edmund's face crumpled. "The letters. You found—" "I know, my son, I know." "Then you know why I can't—" Alexander's voice broke. "Marcus was 15 years old. 15. "Yes," Edmund whispered. "And not a day passes that I don't see his face. But Alexander, you don't know everything. Please let me—" The king's words dissolved into a coughing fit. Blood speckled his lips. And Catherine quickly wiped it away. The physicians hovering nearby exchanged grim looks. "Your Majesty must rest," one ventured. "No!" Edmund's voice found strength from somewhere deep within. "No, I must. Alexander, your cousin Marcus. He was not fit to rule." "Because you decided?" Alexander's voice was ice. "Because he was mad!" Edmund burst out, then collapsed back, spent. "His father hid it well, but the boy heard voices, saw visions. He believed he was chosen by God to purify the kingdom through fire. Do you understand? He would have burned half of Aldoria in his delusions." Alexander stood frozen. This changed nothing. Or did it change everything? "So, you had him killed," he said flatly. "No!" Edmund's eyes blazed with his old fire. "No, I had him sent away, yes, hidden. Given to monks who could care for him. But I swear to you, on your mother's life, I never meant for him to die. The plague that took him—" Edmund's voice broke. "Perhaps that was God's judgment on me. But I saved our kingdom from a mad king even as I damned myself." The room fell silent except for Edmund's labored breathing. Alexander felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. All his righteous anger, his moral certainty, where did it stand now? "The letters," he said finally. "They spoke of ensuring he would never return. Prison is still prison, whether the bars are made of iron or exile. Edmund admitted. "I am not innocent, my son, but I was 20 years old, terrified, and watching my cousin speak of purging the kingdom with holy fire. The council came to me, begged me to act, and I chose the lesser evil. Or what I believed was lesser." Alexander sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. His sister had been right. The crown had been his father's prison as much as his prize. Every good deed, every just law had been an attempt to balance the scales. "All these years," Alexander said quietly. "Why didn't you tell me?" "How could I?" Edmund's voice was fading. "How could I burden you with such knowledge? I hoped to take it to my grave. But then you found the letters, and I saw in your eyes." He reached out weakly. "I saw myself. The day I learned what power truly costs. And I knew I had failed you worst of all." Alexander looked at his father, really looked at him. Not the king, not the betrayer, but the man. Flawed, frightened, trying to do right in an impossible situation, just as Alexander himself would soon have to do. "I need time," Alexander said. "I need to think." "Time," Edmund repeated with a ghost of a smile. "The one thing I cannot give you." His eyes found his son's. "But Alexander, whatever you decide about me, be a better king. Learn from my sins. Let them make you wiser, not harder." Alexander stood to leave, but Edmund's hand shot out with surprising strength, grasping his wrist. "Please," the king whispered, "I know I have no right to ask, but I am your father, and I am afraid, not of death, but of dying with your hatred. Can you forgive me?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Alexander looked down at the man who had given him life, who had taught him to be strong, who had carried a terrible secret for 25 years. He thought of mercy and justice, of love and betrayal, of all the impossible choices that awaited him as king. Alexander began, but the words wouldn't come. He pulled his hand free, backing away. "I can't. Not yet. I'm sorry, I can't." He fled the chamber, leaving behind the sound of his father's quiet weeping and his mother's soft consolations. In the corridor, he collapsed against the wall, feeling as though he might shatter. Isabella appeared beside him. "It's not weakness to forgive, you know." "Isn't it?" Alexander asked bitterly. "Where does forgiveness end and enabling begin? If I absolve him, what does that make me?" "Human," Isabella said simply. "Come, the night is long and you need clarity." She led him to the palace gardens, where the rain had stopped and stars peeked through breaking clouds. They walked in silence among the roses their mother had planted, each lost in thought. "Do you know what I remember most about Father?" Isabella asked suddenly. "Not the grand ceremonies or royal proclamations. I remember him sitting by my bed when I had scarlet fever, refusing to leave even when the physicians warned him of contagion. I remember him teaching you to swim when you were terrified of water, patient even when you screamed and fought." "That doesn't erase—" "No," Isabella agreed. "It doesn't, but perhaps that's the point. We are all more than our worst moments, Alexander, and if we cannot forgive others their humanity, how can we hope for forgiveness for our own?" Before Alexander could respond, bells began to toll. Not the regular hour bells, but the slow, solemn rhythm that meant only one thing. They ran back to the palace, but it was too late. King Edmund of Aldoria was dead. His final words, an unanswered plea for forgiveness. The great cathedral of Aldoria had never seemed so cold. Alexander stood before the altar in his coronation robes, the weight of them nothing compared to the burden in his heart. In 3 days, he would be crowned king, but first, they must bury his father. The funeral had drawn nobles from across the realm and beyond. They came to pay respects to good King Edmund, the reformer, the protector of the poor, the king who had brought 25 years of peace. None of them knew the truth that gnawed at Alexander's soul. He had not slept since his father's death. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Edmund's face, heard those final words. "Forgive me." The plea echoed in the empty chambers of his heart, finding no answer. "Your Majesty," Lord Pemberton approached, already using the title that would soon be official. "The Archbishop wishes to discuss the funeral oration." "Tell him to speak of the king my father appeared to be," Alexander said coldly. "Let the myth live on." Pemberton hesitated. "Sire, if I may, your father left something for you." He produced a sealed letter. "He gave it to me months ago, with instructions to deliver it only if... well..." Alexander stared at the letter bearing his father's seal. Part of him wanted to burn it unread, but curiosity won. He broke the seal with trembling fingers. "My beloved son," the letter began in Edmund's careful script. "If you are reading this, then I have failed in my greatest wish, to earn your forgiveness before my death. I do not write to plead my case again, but to free you from the burden I have placed upon your shoulders. Enclosed you will find documents, the true documents, regarding your cousin Marcus, reports from the monastery where he lived his final years, testimony from the monks who cared for him. Read them or burn them as you will, but know this: every choice I made from love. Love for our kingdom, love for our people, and yes, love for you, though you were not yet born. I do not ask you to forgive me. I ask only that you do not let my sins poison your reign. Be the king I tried to be without the shadows I cast. Rule with justice tempered by mercy, strength guided by wisdom. And know that whatever you think of me, I have loved you every day of your life, and I will love you still from whatever awaits beyond. Your flawed but devoted father, Edmund." Alexander's hand shook as he unfolded the additional documents. Page after page of careful testimonies from monks, describing Marcus's condition in heartbreaking detail. The boy who believed he could speak to angels, who tried to set fire to the monastery twice, convinced he was purifying the world. The young man who died not of plague, as the official story claimed, but by his own hand, throwing himself from a tower in a moment of divine delusion. "Dear God," Alexander breathed. His mother appeared at his elbow, dressed in mourning black. "You've read them. You knew all of this?" Catherine nodded slowly. "I was there when the council came to your father. I watched him age 10 years in a single night, wrestling with an impossible choice. Send Marcus away and live with the guilt, or let him take the throne and watch the kingdom burn. But the letters I found, they made it sound so calculated, so cold." "Have you never written words you did not mean in moments of trying to convince yourself?" Catherine asked gently. "Your father wrote those letters to his co-conspirators, yes. But read them again, Alexander. See how he tries to justify, to rationalize. Those are not the words of a cold murderer, but of a frightened young man trying to believe he was doing right." Alexander sank into a pew, suddenly feeling every one of his 28 years. "What am I supposed to do with this?" "Whatever brings you peace," Catherine said simply. "Your father is beyond earthly judgment now. The question is whether you can live with the weight of unforgiveness." The cathedral doors opened, admitting a gust of cold air and an unexpected visitor. A woman in simple traveling clothes approached hesitantly. She was perhaps 50 years old, with kind eyes and work-worn hands. "Your Majesty," she said, curtsying awkwardly to Alexander. "I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Sister Margaret. I've traveled from the monastery of St. Erasmus." Alexander's blood ran cold. That was where Marcus had been sent. "I cared for Lord Marcus in his final years," Sister Margaret continued. "When I heard of King Edmund's passing, I felt compelled to come. There are things you should know, things that were never put in the official reports." "Such as?" Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. Sister Margaret glanced around the empty cathedral, then moved closer. Your father visited Marcus. Every year in secret. He would come disguised as a merchant, bringing gifts, sitting with him for hours. Marcus didn't always recognize him, the poor boy's mind wandered so, but your father came faithfully. Alexander felt the world tilt. That's impossible. The risk of discovery was one he gladly took. Sister Margaret smiled sadly. I spoke with him many times. He loved that boy like his own son, blamed himself for not finding a better way. The guilt ate at him, but he never stopped trying to bring some small comfort to Marcus's life. Why are you telling me this? Alexander asked hoarsely. Because on his last visit, your father asked me a question that has haunted me since. He asked if I thought God could forgive a man who chose the lesser evil when no good choice existed. I told him I believed God's mercy was infinite. But I could see he wasn't asking about God's forgiveness. Sister Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden box. Marcus made this in one of his clearer moments. He asked me to give it to his uncle. He knew who your father was at the end. He said to tell him. She paused, tears gathering in her eyes. He said to tell him he understood, and he was sorry for being broken. Alexander took the box with numb fingers. Inside was a simple wooden cross, crudely carved but with evident care. On the back, in shaky letters, were the words, "For Uncle Edmund. Thank you for saving them from me." The sob that tore from Alexander's throat echoed through the cathedral. His mother's arms came around him as he wept, for his father, for Marcus, for the terrible weight of choices that shaped kingdoms. He knew, Alexander choked out. Marcus knew what he was, and he forgave. Yes, Catherine murmured, and your father lived with that forgiveness as the heaviest burden of all. It would have been easier if Marcus had hated him. Alexander clutched the wooden cross, feeling its rough edges bite into his palm. How simple he had made it all in his mind. Edmund the betrayer, Marcus the victim. But life was rarely painted in such clear strokes of black and white. I need to be alone, he said finally. His mother and Sister Margaret withdrew, leaving him in the vast silence of the cathedral. Alexander walked slowly to the altar, where his father's coffin lay draped in royal purple. The crown that would soon be his sat on a velvet cushion nearby, catching the light from stained glass windows. He thought of all the kings who had worn that crown, all the choices they had made in its shadow. How many of them had carried secrets like his father's? How many had chosen between evils, hoping history would be kind? I don't know if I can forgive you, he whispered to the coffin. But I understand you now. Is that enough? No answer came, of course. The dead keep their own counsel. Alexander spent the night in vigil beside his father's coffin, as tradition demanded of the heir. But instead of prayers, he found himself speaking to Edmund as he hadn't in months, about the kingdom, about his fears, about the terrible loneliness of power. You tried to spare me this knowledge, he said as dawn broke through the windows. But perhaps that was your only true mistake. If I had known, if I had understood the weight you carried, maybe I could have helped bear it. Maybe you wouldn't have died thinking I hated you. Lord Pemberton found him there as the cathedral bells rang the morning hour. Sire, it's time, the funeral procession. Alexander rose stiffly, his decision made. Pemberton, I want changes to the ceremony. Sire, my father's eulogy. I will deliver it myself. The old advisor's eyes widened. But tradition states, tradition be damned, Alexander said firmly. A son will speak for his father, and I will speak the truth, not all of it, but enough. The kingdom should know that their good king was also a man who struggled, who bore guilt, who tried to atone. They should know that even kings need forgiveness. The funeral proceeded with all the pomp tradition demanded. The streets were lined with mourners, common folk who had benefited from Edmund's reforms, nobles who had prospered under his reign. They all came to say farewell to the king they thought they knew. In the cathedral, packed with dignitaries and draped in black, Alexander took the pulpit. He looked out at the sea of faces, his mother, his sister, the council who had conspired with his father all those years ago, now aged and bearing their own guilt. "We gather to mourn King Edmund," Alexander began, his voice carrying to every corner. "But more than that, we gather to remember a man. Not a perfect man, not a king without flaws, but a man who tried every day to be worthy of the crown he wore." He spoke of his father's reforms, his kindness, his dedication. But he also spoke carefully of the burden of leadership, of impossible choices, of the weight of decisions that affected thousands. "My father once told me," Alexander said, finding his mother's eyes in the crowd, "that a crown is not a prize but a penance. I did not understand then. I do now. He wore his crown as both, and in the wearing tried to balance the scales of a choice made in youth that haunted him to his final breath. He could see the confusion in some faces, the understanding dawning in others. Let them wonder. Let them question. Perhaps that was better than blind worship of a false idol. I stand here as his son and his successor, and I say this. King Edmund of Aldoria was a good man who made a terrible choice to prevent a greater evil. He spent his life trying to atone, to be worthy of the trust placed in him. He was human. He was flawed. And he was my father." Alexander's voice broke on the last words. He gripped the pulpit, drawing strength from somewhere deep within. In his final moments, he asked something of me that I could not give. Forgiveness. I failed him in that, and I will carry that failure as he carried his own. But I make this promise before God and this assembly. I will honor his legacy not by forgetting his flaws, but by learning from them. I will rule with justice and mercy, as he taught me. And I will remember that even kings are only men in need of grace. He stepped down from the pulpit to absolute silence. Then, from somewhere in the back, came the sound of clapping. One person, then another, until the cathedral rang with applause, not the polite acknowledgement of courtiers, but genuine appreciation for truth spoken in a place that so rarely heard it. They buried Edmund as the sun reached its zenith, in the royal crypt where 24 kings lay before him. Alexander stood as chief mourner, accepting condolences, playing his part. But when the formal ceremonies ended, he returned alone to the grave. He knelt on the cold stone, placing the wooden cross Marcus had carved atop the fresh earth. "I understand now," he said quietly. "The choice you made, the price you paid. I understand the weight of the crown and the terrible mathematics of kingship, how sometimes we must choose not between good and evil, but between evil and worse." The words came slowly, painfully, like drawing poison from a wound. "You were not the perfect king I believed you to be as a boy. You were something harder and more precious, a flawed man who tried to do right. You failed, yes, but you also saved a kingdom from madness, raised a family in love, and spent 25 years trying to earn the forgiveness you thought you didn't deserve." Alexander pressed his hand to the earth, feeling its coldness through his gloves. "I cannot forget what you did. The knowledge will shadow every decision I make as king. But I can—" His voice caught. "I can forgive the man who did it, the father who loved me, who carried his guilt with grace, who tried to spare me this burden." The words, once spoken, seemed to lift something from his chest. Not absolution, that was not his to give, but understanding, acceptance, the beginning of peace. "I forgive you, Father," he whispered. God help me, I forgive you. And I pray that someday, when I face my own impossible choices, my own son will find the strength to forgive me too. He rose, feeling strangely empty and full at once. Tomorrow, the council would meet. The day after, he would be crowned. The future stretched before him, full of challenges and choices he could not yet imagine. But for now, in this moment, a son had made peace with his father's ghost. And perhaps, Alexander thought as he walked back toward the palace and his waiting destiny, that was the first true act of his kingship. Learning that mercy was not weakness, and that forgiveness could be the hardest and most necessary form of strength. 5 years had passed since King Alexander took the throne, 5 years since he spoke forgiveness over his father's grave. The kingdom of Aldoria had prospered under his rule. But on this autumn morning, as rain lashed against the palace windows, Alexander faced a crisis that threatened to undo everything. Lord Pemberton, now gray as winter frost, laid the documents before him with shaking hands. "Sire, we have confirmed it. Prince Roderick of Valmont is indeed the son of Marcus." Alexander felt the world shift beneath him. "That's impossible. Marcus died unmarried, childless." "So we believed," Pemberton said grimly. But it seems in his clearer moments at the monastery, he formed an attachment with a local woman. She bore his son in secret and fled to Valmont after his death. Now that son has grown, learned of his parentage, and comes claiming the throne of Aldoria. On what grounds? Though Alexander knew the answer before Pemberton spoke it. On the grounds that his father was wrongfully denied his inheritance. Prince Roderick has documents, testimonies, and sire, he has the letters, your father's letters. Alexander closed his eyes. The very letters that had nearly destroyed his relationship with his father now returned to haunt his reign. How? One of the original conspirators, Lord Garrett, kept copies. His son found them after his death and, seeing opportunity for advancement, took them to Valmont. Alexander rose, pacing to the window. Below, the city sprawled peaceful and prosperous, unaware that war clouds gathered. What does Valmont demand? King Leopold supports his nephew's claim. He offers 2 choices: abdicate in favor of Prince Roderick or face invasion. He has assembled an army at our borders. Isabella burst into the room, her face flushed with urgency. "Alexander, I've just come from the dungeons. You must hear this. I've been speaking with the captured Valmont spy." "Not now, Isabella." "Yes, now!" She grabbed his arm. "Prince Roderick doesn't know the truth about his father. He's been told Marcus was a gentle scholar murdered for his throne. The spy says Roderick genuinely believes he's righting a historic wrong." Alexander laughed bitterly. "Of course. Why would truth matter now?" "It matters," Isabella insisted, "because Roderick is said to be an honorable man. If he knew what Marcus really was—" "We have documents proving Marcus's madness," Pemberton offered. "Sister Margaret still lives. She could testify." "And would anyone believe us?" Alexander asked. "Or would they think we fabricated evidence to keep our stolen throne?" The great doors opened to admit Queen Sophia, Alexander's wife of 3 years. Where another queen might have shown fear, she radiated calm determination. "My lords, my lady, the council is assembled. They await your word, husband." Alexander looked at the 3 people he trusted most. "What would you have me do?" "Fight," Isabella said immediately. "You are the rightful king. Father's choices, right or wrong, don't change that." "Negotiate," Pemberton counseled. "Perhaps lands, titles, some acknowledgement of past wrongs." "Neither," Sophia said quietly. When all eyes turned to her, she continued. "Meet with Prince Roderick, face to face. Tell him the truth." "He would never agree to meet," Alexander protested. "He might," Sophia said, "if the invitation came with something he wants. The original letters. All of them." The room fell silent. Those letters were Alexander's protection, the proof that he had not usurped the throne himself, but inherited a decision made before his birth. "You would have me give him the very weapons he needs to destroy me?" "I would have you do what your father could not," Sophia replied. "Trust in truth, even when it costs everything." That night, Alexander stood in his father's study, the very room where he had discovered the letters years ago. The portrait of Edmund watched from the wall, painted in his prime, but somehow capturing the sadness that had always lingered in his eyes. "What would you do?" Alexander asked the painting. "You who chose secrets and shadows, would you counsel me to do the same?" He thought he knew the answer. Edmund would protect the kingdom at any cost, bear any burden, keep any secret. It was both his strength and his tragedy. A knock interrupted his brooding. "Enter." To his surprise, it was not a servant, but an old woman, bent with age, but with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Your Majesty," she said, curtsying carefully. "I am Lady Constance. I doubt you remember me." The name stirred memory. "You were my grandmother's lady-in-waiting." "Indeed. And before that, I served at court when your father took the throne. I knew Prince Marcus." Alexander gestured for her to sit. "Then you know what he was." "I know what he became," Lady Constance corrected. "But I also remember the boy he was before the madness took hold. Brilliant, kind, full of dreams for the kingdom. The tragedy was not just in his illness, but in how it twisted something beautiful into something terrible." "Why tell me this now?" "Because I hear whispers that his son comes to claim what was his father's, and because I think you should know. Your father tried other ways first. He brought physicians from across the realm, sought holy men who claimed to cure afflictions of the mind. Only when Marcus tried to burn the council chamber with the lords inside did Edmund act." Alexander leaned forward. "You were there?" "I helped put out the flames," she said simply. "Marcus stood in the smoke, arms raised, calling on God to cleanse the kingdom with holy fire. Your father wept as they restrained him, not tears of fear, but of grief for the cousin he loved. Yet he still sent him away." "What would you have done?" Lady Constance asked. "Watch him burn the kingdom? Execute him for madness? Or remove him somewhere he could harm neither himself nor others?" The same impossible arithmetic his father had faced. Alexander felt the weight of it pressing down. And now his son comes, ignorant of this history, ready to wage war for a throne his father was incapable of holding. "Perhaps," the old lady said, rising with difficulty, "it is time to end the cycle of secrets. Your father thought to protect you by hiding truth. Look where that led. Perhaps Prince Roderick deserves better." After she left, Alexander made his decision. He sent a message to Valmont that very night, proposing a meeting. As Sophia had suggested, he offered to bring the original letters. But he asked for something in return, that Prince Roderick come himself, not sending envoys or generals. The response came swifter than expected. Prince Roderick would meet him at the border, at the abandoned chapel of St. Erasmus, fitting as it bore the same name as the monastery where Marcus had lived and died. Alexander prepared for the journey against all advice. The council feared assassination. Isabella worried about deception. Even Sophia questioned her own suggestion as the reality set in. But Alexander was resolved. He would face this ghost from the past, armed only with truth. The chapel stood on a hill overlooking both kingdoms, its stones weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Alexander arrived with only a small guard, the letters in a leather satchel at his side. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, riders appeared from the Valmont side. Prince Roderick was younger than Alexander had expected, perhaps 23, with the bearing of a soldier, and eyes that held his father's intensity without the madness. He dismissed his guards to match Alexander's gesture, and the two men faced each other in the chapel's ruins. "So," Roderick said, his voice carefully controlled, "the usurper comes." "I come as one man to another," Alexander replied, "to end a cycle of pain that began before either of us was born." "Pretty words." Roderick's hand rested on his sword hilt. "Have you brought what you promised?" Alexander held out the satchel. "The letters that condemned your father. But before you read them, there are other documents you should see." He produced Sister Margaret's reports, the monastery records, testimonies from those who knew Marcus. Roderick's eyes narrowed. "Forgeries, no doubt." "Read them," Alexander said simply. "Then decide." For an hour, Roderick read in silence as darkness gathered around them. Alexander watched emotions play across his face: disbelief, anger, confusion, and finally, a dawning horror. "This cannot be true," Roderick said hoarsely. "My mother said he was gentle, scholarly. He was once, but madness took him young. My father, your father's cousin, tried everything to help him. Only when Marcus became a danger to the entire kingdom did Edmund act. And even then, he couldn't bring himself to have Marcus killed, only hidden away where he could be cared for." Roderick stood abruptly, pacing the ruined nave. "You expect me to believe my father was mad? That your father was justified? I expect you to see what I have seen, that there are no heroes or villains in this tale, only men trying to make impossible choices. My father wronged yours, yes, but not from greed or ambition, from fear of what a mad king would do to Aldoria. And what of me?" Roderick whirled to face him. "What of the life stolen from me? I should have been raised a prince, not hidden in shame." "Yes," Alexander agreed quietly. "You should have been. My father's greatest failing was not in removing Marcus from succession, but in letting fear drive him to hide the truth. That secrecy birthed more pain than honesty ever could have." Roderick laughed bitterly. "And now you offer me honesty? When I stand at your border with an army? I offer you more than that." Alexander took a deep breath. "I offer you acknowledgement of the wrong done. A place in Aldoria, if you wish it. Titles, lands, a seat on my council. Not as payment for silence, but as recognition of who you should have been. You would trust Marcus's son in your court? I would trust the man I see before me. One who seeks justice, not conquest. One who came himself rather than sending armies. One who reads difficult truths rather than clinging to comfortable lies." Roderick stared at him. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." Alexander spread his hands. "We are both sons of flawed fathers, inheritors of their choices. We can continue their war, or we can choose differently. My uncle, King Leopold, expects me to press my claim. And my council expects me to defend mine. But what do you want, Roderick? Not what others expect. Not what the past demands. What do you want?" For a long moment, Roderick was silent. When he spoke, his voice was thick with unshed tears. "I want to understand. All my life I've defined myself as the son of a martyred prince. If that's a lie, not a lie, a partial truth. Your father was brilliant, beloved, full of promise. That the promise was destroyed by illness makes him no less worthy of mourning." Roderick sank onto a stone bench, suddenly looking very young. "My mother, did she know?" "I don't know. Perhaps she saw only the man she loved, not the madness. Perhaps she chose to remember him as he was in his clear moments. Love can blind us to difficult truths, or help us see past them to the person beneath," Roderick said quietly. He looked up at Alexander. "Your offer? You would truly welcome Marcus's son into your kingdom?" I would welcome my cousin, Alexander corrected. We share blood, share a legacy of pain. Perhaps together we can transform that legacy into something better. Roderick stood slowly. I need time to think, to decide. This changes everything. Take all the time you need. But know this, whatever you decide, I will not raise arms against you unless you force my hand. I have seen what secrets and violence birth. I would rather risk honesty. They parted as full darkness fell, each returning to their respective camps. Alexander found his guards near panic at his long absence, but he calmed them with assurances that talks were progressing. 3 days passed. The armies watched each other across the border, tension mounting. On the 4th dawn, a single rider approached the Aldorian camp. It was Roderick, alone. I've been to the monastery of St. Erasmus, he said without preamble when brought to Alexander. I spoke with Sister Margaret, saw where my father lived, where he died. I visited his grave. Alexander waited. She told me of your father's visits, how he came every year, brought gifts, wept over what necessity had forced him to do. She showed me things my father made in his lucid moments, beautiful things, brilliant things, and things he made when the madness took him, disturbing drawings of cities in flames, angels of judgment wielding swords. I'm sorry, Alexander said, meaning it. So am I. Roderick met his eyes. Sorry for what was lost, for what might have been, but I also understand now. Your father saved the kingdom from my father, but he also saved my father from himself. In those monastery walls, he found peace he never would have known on a throne. Then you'll withdraw your claim? I'll do more than that. Roderick straightened. I'll accept your offer. Not lands or titles, I have those in Valmont, but a place here, a chance to know the kingdom my father should have ruled, to serve it as he couldn't. If you'll have me. Relief flooded through Alexander. Nothing would honor me more. There will be those who see me as a threat, who whisper of my claim. Let them whisper. Truth spoken openly loses its power to destroy. They clasped hands, sealing a peace that no treaty could have achieved. The armies withdrew, crisis averted not through strength or strategy, but through the simple courage of honesty. Months later, at the feast celebrating the harvest, Alexander watched Roderick charm the court with stories of Valmont. The young man had indeed found his place, serving as an unofficial ambassador between the kingdoms, healing wounds decades old. Sophia appeared at Alexander's elbow. You're thinking of your father. I am. Wondering what he would make of this. I think, Sophia said softly, he would be proud. You succeeded where he failed, not in keeping the throne, but in breaking the cycle of secrets that nearly destroyed it. Isabella joined them, laughing at something Roderick had said. The great hall was warm with firelight and fellowship, the kingdom at peace. You know what the strangest part is? Alexander mused. If father had told the truth from the beginning, acknowledged Marcus's illness, treated it with compassion rather than shame, none of the rest would have happened. Roderick would have been raised knowing his father's story. I would have understood the burden of the crown. So much pain, all from one decision to hide truth. But then, Isabella pointed out with a small smile, you might not have learned the lesson you did. About forgiveness, about the weight of choices, about mercy being strength. Your father's mistakes shaped you into the king you are. It was true, Alexander realized. His father's sins had taught him more than his virtues ever could have. The pain of those 3 months of estrangement, the struggle to forgive. They had prepared him for this moment, for choosing honesty over secrecy, trust over fear. Queen Catherine, his mother, now silver-haired but still graceful, approached with Roderick at her side. I've been telling our cousin about his grandfather, my memories of the king before Marcus's illness. He would like to create a memorial, if you're willing." "What kind of memorial?" Alexander asked. Roderick spoke carefully. "A sanctuary for those afflicted in mind, as my father was. A place where they can find care, not exile. Where their families need not bear shame. I thought it could bear both their names. The Edmund and Marcus House of Healing." Alexander felt his throat tighten. Yes. Yes, absolutely. As the evening wore on, Alexander stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the city. The stars were bright above Aldoria, the same stars his father had looked upon while wrestling with impossible choices. "I understand now," he whispered to the night. "You asked me to forgive you, but what you really needed was to forgive yourself. You never could you? Carried it to your grave." The wind stirred, and for a moment Alexander could almost imagine it carried an answer. Not words, but a feeling of release, of peace finally found. He thought of Prince Roderick choosing to build rather than destroy, of Isabella's wisdom about learning from pain, of Sophia's courage in counseling truth. He thought of his mother's grace and Pemberton's faithful service, all of them shaped by the past, but not enslaved to it. "Your grandson will be born soon," Alexander said to the stars, his hand on Sophia's barely showing belly. "What world will we leave him? What choices will he face? What secrets or truths will shape his reign?" He knew one thing for certain. The child would know his history, all of it, the good and bad, the triumphs and failures. He would understand that kings were human, that power was burden as much as blessing, that even the best men could make terrible choices when faced with impossible odds. But most of all, he would know that forgiveness was possible, that cycles could be broken, that truth, however painful, was always better than the prettiest lie. Alexander remained on the balcony long into the night, keeping watch over his kingdom. Somewhere in the darkness, construction had already begun on the Edmund and Marcus House of Healing. From tragedy, compassion. From secrets, truth. From forgiveness, peace. The crown sat heavy on his head, as it always had, as it always would. But tonight, for the first time since his father's death, Alexander wore it without the shadow of the past darkening his face. He had learned the hardest lesson of kingship, that sometimes the greatest strength was admitting weakness, the greatest wisdom was acknowledging ignorance, and the greatest power was the courage to forgive. In the great hall, music swelled and laughter rang. His kingdom celebrated, unaware of the crisis so narrowly averted, the war prevented by words rather than swords. As it should be, some burdens were meant to be carried by kings alone. But some truths, Alexander had learned, were meant to be shared. And in that sharing, in that vulnerable honesty, lay the seeds of a stronger kingdom than his father had ever dreamed. He turned back to the warmth and light, to his family and his future, leaving the ghosts of the past to their rest. At last, after years of struggle, both father and son had found their peace. And in that peace, a kingdom's true golden age began, built not on the foundation of a perfect king, but on the wisdom of a flawed man who had learned to forgive.